All right, welcome back to the War Room. I'm here with the lovely gentlemen before me, Thomas Seal and Bert Johnson. Boys, how are we doing today?
We're doing good.
Pretty solid. Trying to make it through
Okay.
Christmas, all the fun stuff.
Yep. We are 2 days away from Christmas, guys, and what better way to celebrate Christmas than to debate about college football, especially a very, I'd say, divisive, very exciting still, and electric playoff voting and playoff outlook for regards to the first round of these playoffs coming up at the new year. So yeah, we're going to dive into the college football playoff selection as well as preview the first round. So strap in, y'all. This one's going to be a ride because there's a lot to talk about. So we'll get right into it. The top four selected with a lot of controversy. Number 1, Michigan. Number 2, Washington. Number 3, Texas. And number 4, Alabama, with Florida State being the first one out. The second one out being Georgia after losing to Alabama in the SEC championship game. Oregon being left in at number 8 after losing the Pac-12 championship game. Ohio State being left at number 7 because they lost to Michigan in the game. And number 9, Missouri being left at as the fourth one out for being irrelevant. So
I wouldn't go that far.
Wait, did you say Missouri?
Yeah, Missouri had a good season, man.
Yeah,
I know.
Doing pretty well.
I don't know why I just felt like taking a shot at Missouri. But yeah, so that was our top four guys, and obviously the controversy was around Florida State being given the first one out, being left out of the playoff despite being undefeated. And one of the official reasons that they described for leaving them out was due to changes of personnel due to the course of injuries and star players not being available, which this is really the first time we've seen that be used to determine a playoff seeding.
Well, I say let's kind of just hit the nail on, did the playoff committee get it right?
I would say yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, what do you want us to say? I mean, the whole purpose, it has never been the most deserving teams. It has always been supposed to be like this. And it was the same reason why we moved on from 2 to 4 in the first place. It's supposed to be the best games. It's supposed to be the best teams. It doesn't include, I mean, it's best. It doesn't include what your record is. It doesn't say whether you're undefeated or not. It is simply the best teams. So I don't know. I'm not going to go into super depth quite yet because I kind of want to get y'all to explain kind of y'all's thought process behind things. But I'll save my super in-depth stuff for later.
So to play devil's advocate, you talk about that they want the whole purpose of the playoff is to send the best four, and that sometimes record doesn't always define that, within margin like of a one loss and whatnot. And look, we've seen teams like Alabama get in there with one loss, 2 or 3 times before this, right?
Yeah,
at least twice.
Have to look. You also look at who the one loss is to. The one loss was to the other team in the playoff.
Yeah, number 3.
Sure, and that's a fair point. They're also accounting for the fact that Alabama is a completely different team now than they were then.
Mm-hmm.
When they took that loss, right?
I have
my counter argument with devil's advocate, though. Is, and like I said, I'm on the side of they got it right. I'm just on the side of, in regards to how many playoff there's 2 things. I mentioned this when I did a little solo episode, just so we can get something out when this topic was hot. We had Stephen A. Smith going all over ESPN talking about TCU getting blown out by Georgia in the national championship is the whole reason this happened. Florida State, you can blame them. Okay, well, hold on a minute. It's not just TCU that has gotten blown out in the playoff before, but before you even dive into that, they beat Michigan, right? They didn't get blown out in a semifinal. So if you're claiming that TCU is the reason, that means also that Michigan's the reason, which means they only sent 2 of the right 4 teams last year. And I don't think that was the case. But more importantly, if you just go back since the existence of this college football playoff, how many times have we sent a terrible Notre Dame team, a terrible Ohio State team, and a terrible Clemson team? Oklahoma 1 year, right? And Oklahoma had some arguments to go in. Like, it's just the whole. We'll put just we won't take certain things into account. We're going to take availability into account. We're going to take all this other stuff into account. That is the reasons why they took Florida State out. This is really, in my opinion, the first time we've seen this done to where they got it right. And honestly, for the right reasons. But where was this since the existence of this 14 playoff? And where was this when we kept sending these teams that, look, you can blame TCU all they want, but they made it to the championship. Where were we at when we sent terrible teams that got blown out by 40 points or at least 3 scores or more in the semi-playoff? Where was this uproar when we sent all these teams that got blown out for the semifinals of the playoff?
The fact of the matter is this. You have to ask yourself the question, why were these teams even in the conversation to begin with, right? Why were they in the conversation to be in the playoff? It's because it was their records, right? A lot of these teams were undefeated or had one loss out of the blue to some team, whatever, right? But the fact of the matter is, a one loss, and we can break down this argument 100 different ways. But the fact of the matter is this: when you take a one-loss SEC school or a one-loss Big Ten school, it is a hell of a lot different than a team that comes from some crappy conference. Okay, like let me explain this. What was Texas's big argument to get into the playoff this year?
They beat Bama.
They beat Alabama. That's an SEC school. If you had taken that win out of Texas's schedule, how would have they gotten in? They're out.
They wouldn't have, because they lost to Oklahoma. They wouldn't have.
They lost to Oklahoma. So you're basically saying, okay, you have to have a signature win against a signature conference school. Florida State was trying to do the same thing. What was their argument this year? Other than being undefeated.
Their win over LSU.
Their win over LSU. But here's the fact, and this is why Alabama got in it to begin with, right? It's we beat LSU, we beat Ole Miss, we beat Georgia. There's a clear difference there, right? And here's the other thing. Those schools that got in all those years beforehand, they're going off and winning against teams that honestly they're not good. They're not the same caliber of teams. And what happens with the committee is they see that 13-0 or whatever it is, and they say, we have to put them in. We have to put them in. There's no way we can't. And I think this season, the reason it was different is just because you had a long list of teams that were good enough. There wasn't a clear team that was just better than everybody else. There was a jumbled pack. I mean, I think you could honestly see all the way back to potentially like Ole Miss or Missouri, like having an argument to be in the CFP. I think I don't know. I think this year, the one difference was the fact that there was a plethora of teams that were capable of being put into those 4 slots. And then by having Jordan Travis get hurt, you open up the possibility of putting that Alabama team in. And I think that's why you saw it.
So, Thomas, I've got a question for you real quick. So there is I'd say the easiest mathematical algorithm to sort this out that takes into account pretty much everything in regards to the quality of your wins and losses and your strength of schedule and all that good stuff, and also how much you won those games by, and then source things out like that. It's called strength of record, and it's rarely talked about. It was brought up by Max Kellerman, and in regards to strength of record versus strength of schedule, the strength of record has the top 5 sorted out as Huskies at number 1, Michigan at number 2, Florida State at number 3, Alabama number 4, and TU at number 5. Now, obviously, and then here's where the question comes, Thomas. You look at how the NFL does their playoff, right? And everything's an algorithm, right? Like there's always a clause for every situation, even if teams are tied. Like to the point that for the situation with the Texans coming up, like if they tie with one other team or whatever, and like X things happen, and it's like, a variable of a variable of a variable of a variable, then the last thing that sorts out the algorithm is a literal coin flip to figure out who gets sent, right? No human error required, no human interaction required. None of this. Let's lock 25 old dudes and other people in a room and have them debate and cast votes to figure out who should go. So do you think as we move from the 4-team playoff to the 12-team playoff, should we still have a committee that decides how these rankings come out and how these playoff spots get sorted? Or should they move closer to an algorithm like what the NFL has, so that way the drama and the crap is taken out of it?
Well, obviously, I was trying to mention this earlier. The simple solution to this is expand it to a 12-team playoff. That is, that's just logical. Also, I heard that I think JJ Watt came up with this idea specifically for this year, especially since it's like a kind of like a transition year, is making a 6-team playoff, right? Including, yes, Georgia didn't deserve to be in it because we're all on Florida State
I
right now.
don't know about that.
As in like the main 4 and the first one out. Like
you can make. I think there's
like
I think there's a lot of argument.
Florida State has the biggest argument to be in, but you have Georgia losing to Bama, with Bama's only loss being to Texas, and then obviously the whole Texas beating Bama thing and that whole debacle.
Not to mention, Georgia's strength of schedule is ranked 39, and their strength of record is 7. So, had an easy schedule this year.
You're going to have to explain something for me. What is the difference between strength of record and strength of schedule?
So, strength of schedule looks at just, hey, regardless of the results, how many good teams did you play? What were they ranked? All that good stuff. Strength of record takes into account, did you win, how much you won by, and a bunch of other factors. So it's basically the closest thing we have to a strength of a team's performance over a whole season that takes in a lot of other factors than
so
just strength of schedule.
Basically what it's saying is like it would matter much more and a team would be more dominant. Let's say Alabama versus Texas, and Texas blew out Bama instead of winning by a touchdown. It would be a stronger, more dominant version of like a Texas team comparative. If they just won by a touchdown, then they wouldn't look as good.
So it just takes into account more things. That's all it does.
So question for you: when it comes, you said Florida State had the 3rd best strength of record, correct?
Correct.
Was that with Jordan Travis in, or was that without Jordan Travis?
Well, Jordan Travis got hurt towards the end of the year.
Yeah,
so, I mean,
that's what I'm saying.
He pretty much played the entire season except for like the last 2 games.
What I'm saying, what I'm hinting at here is the strength of record doesn't necessarily apply if your best player is not available.
True, very true. I will say, but I look.
And I mean, you saw that play out. You saw that play out in those last 2 games that Florida State played against Florida and Louisville. The offense was clearly not the same.
Took a step down. Defense was, though. But I will say they didn't take this into account when they sent Ohio State, and they ended up, doing fine in the playoff when they went down to their 3rd-string quarterback in JT Barrett. So,
But there's a difference.
But they kept that pace up, though. There is a difference, yes.
Exactly.
But that's just,
with JT Barrett, they got even better.
Yeah, which was weird, right? We didn't expect that at all. But I think the main thing, look, you can play so many different sides to this, right? It's like, you can do it by strength of record. You can do it you also have to account for teams' availability of key players and how much they dropped off after they lost them. And Florida State had a pretty big drop after they lost Jordan Travis. There's no way to get around that.
When it comes to this, I think we should have gone, and the committee should have gone with JJ's idea and including Florida State and Georgia.
You can't change it that fast. You can't change
it. But consider it more. Because it's one extra bowl game. You give the 1 and 2 seeds a bye. Then you go into the 4-team, sort of like a play-in, to be like, okay, if you're really this good, like
prove it.
Exactly.
Which is all the reason.
Or you go more logistical into it, but like adding that to where it's a possibility to be able to compete.
Here's the issue with
that. Especially if it's against
though.
Georgia. If you're really that good that you say you are, you go ahead and beat the team who is number 1 pretty much the entire season without your best quarterback.
That's what Alabama did, and you're telling me they shouldn't be in the playoff. I mean, the
No,
fact of
they
the matter
should
is,
be in the playoff. I'm just saying, like, as in, if they wanted to do this, since this has been the most controversial decision since the playoff has been a thing, like this, and since it's a transition year in the most
you can't.
controversial way, you can think it would have been worth more considering, like, oh, okay, maybe we can do this more logistically so everyone has a chance to win.
So I have a problem with that, and it's the fact that you're changing the rules in the midst of the season. You're changing the bylaws as it's playing out. It just doesn't seem 100% fair to me. Because
Sure,
then at
but
that point,
it also, in that
where do you
case,
draw the line? Because Missouri can be there and Missouri can sit there and go, well, we only lost 2 games this year. Georgia lost 1 game. Why can't we get a shot?
sure,
And
but
that's
here's
part
the
of the
thing.
reason. And this is why you're sitting there going, okay, we're going to just cap it at 12 next year. I think there's this general sense in the college football world where you have teams that say, okay, these guys have a legitimate chance. These guys have the talent to potentially compete for a national championship, right? The problem that we've run into in years past is, again, who's to say 5, 6, or 7 couldn't win, right?
Oh yeah, I'm not discrediting that. I'm just saying, like, we have to, but yes, it's unfair. But it's also unfair to have an undefeated team get kicked out of the playoffs
And you're
who've been top 4 pretty much the entire season. And again, I'm on the side that they got it right. So I'm not saying, oh, this has to be, because they made the right picks. But then you also have to think, okay, we're kicking a team out because even though they won their bowl or their conference championship, they won out. They played a good amount of teams that were pretty, like, decently good. Like, that's where it comes in, because you don't. This is the first time that this has happened in this scenario. And
so
again, it's a transition year, so a ton of things are changing anyways. So it's like, okay, well, if we're changing to this, we might as well make everyone happy. One, you make, on the economic side of this, on the finance side, you make more money because you had 2 more
I
teams. So
in theory,
in
you're
theory,
100% right.
in,
In
in
theory, you're
theory,
100% right.
in,
In
in theory,
practicality, no.
in theory, yes, and that's where the more logistical parts come in. Where I think that it should have been more considered, being like, okay, maybe we should add. Again,
It's
I'm saying, as
the
in,
practicality again. It just I don't think it could ever happen. I'm in 100% agreement with you. Theoretically, yeah, it makes perfect sense. Have a play in.
or
It's
like,
just
not even like a, yeah, it would be kind of like a play-in, but it's more like we're expanding it to 6, so they're in. But it would be more like a, okay, y'all were the first 2 out on paper comparative, like, but you guys have the strongest arguments to where you could have made it, like a legitimate, like, 50-50 shot of making the playoff, comparative to if you had Missouri or if you had
so
Oregon. Like, you, like, they don't have as strong arguments to where it was like, okay, we have so many different predictions where Georgia and Florida State could have been in or whatnot. Like, you get what I mean? To
no,
where
I know what you mean.
there was no shot. I'm
One
sorry, there was no
okay.
shot Missouri or Oregon would have gotten it.
I don't know. So I was listening to Paul Feinbaum when all this was playing out, and one of the points that he came up and said was originally when they created the 12-team playoff, it was supposed to be implemented for the 2023 season. So this past season. So if we had implemented it, I mean, wouldn't really have been a question, right? You would have had
Absolutely.
everybody in. Georgia's in,
Florida State's
Florida
in,
State's in, Ohio State's in.
or
All of that would be
Oregon's
covered.
in. Oh, yep.
However, there were a couple key players from the ACC, the Big Ten, and the Pac-12, maybe the Big 12. I can't remember exactly who was involved, but it was from other like non-SEC conferences that put the stop on that, right? And my whole point is on this thing is if we really, I mean, nobody knew how the season was going to play out, right? No one knew exactly how the season was going to play out. But if you had made it 12 teams and you had just said, okay, we're going to open it up more, I mean, you would have been in there. So, like, again, we go back to this idea of, oh, we should have just expanded it to make it more teams. Well, that was the original intent. But you stopped that. You stopped that. Florida State and the ACC kind of set a halt to that. And what was their concern? What was their concern when they did that?
People changing conferences and whatnot.
You were going to put more SEC schools in because there would be several one-loss SEC schools or two-loss SEC schools, and you have an argument to say that a two-loss SEC school or even a three-loss SEC school, if you lose to, for example, if you lose to Georgia, Alabama, and LSU, and you lose to them by a combined total of like 10 points between all three schools, right? Who's to say you don't have a shot against a one-loss Clemson or a one-loss Florida State?
Sure,
that was the whole concern with the whole 12-team playoff to begin with, because it really just comes back to strength of conference essentially.
Sure, you're not again. Like I completely understand that, but what we're in right now is it's like the most bizarre case ever. And I'm not okay. And again, to preface this, I think they got it right. They should have had Michigan, Washington, Texas, and Alabama. Right decisions. It's going to be a competitive playoff. They're going to be great games and whatnot. I think Florida State, if they even beat whoever they were going to go in against, they would have gotten absolutely trashed in the national title game. But you also see this was a team who was top 4 all year long.
Why?
Didn't lose a game.
But
so
but
I
get your point.
You're not adding like seven SEC schools like if it was the 12-team playoff. Yes, the
point.
Other team, ironically, that you would be adding would be an SEC school, but you're also looking at it from the perspective of like, okay, if it was 2 SEC schools, like let's say let's say Missouri and Georgia. Ole Miss, yes, thank you.
Two-loss school.
Whoever, that would make more sense. Okay, we don't want this to become an SEC thing. Duh, that makes sense. But if you have, like for right now, if you have Florida State and Georgia, it's like, one, you get more conference diversity because I don't even think there's an ACC school right now. There isn't. You get more conference diversity. Yes, you're adding another SEC school to this because they were the second one out. But it makes everyone more money. You completely avoid this controversy of kicking a team out who has done everything right, who, yes, they lost their best player, but you also have to recognize the record. You have to also recognize, yes, they were the conference champion of a Power 5 conference. It wasn't even just like some mid-major conference, but you add all these things to the pedigree of what Florida State was doing this year. And again, I understand Jordan Travis hurt, out for the season, well, out for pretty much his career for Florida State. But you have to add that aspect in to where it should have been more of a conversation than just like J.J. Watt saying, oh, we should do this, and immediately shutting it down.
Sure, but I think the other thing to keep in mind is, I think what also made this more controversial is you had all these people, like you said, that kept FSU in the top 4 all year. When they lost Jordan Travis, you have Herb Street saying, "Hey, it doesn't matter if you're ranked number 1 or number 4, just win out and you're in." And other people saying the same thing. they do that, and all of a sudden they're left out. So, like I said, I think what I get tired of is I get tired of the fact that with the 14 format, and we'll still have this with the 12-team format, it'll just be to a lesser degree, I believe. But with especially this 14 format, I just get sick of leading up to the selection, having to listen to a bunch of people pushing pencils and talking to microphones, giving pitches for each team, and it turns into a freaking pageant, which is not football to me, like more than it does with the NFL, to where going into the last week of the season what each team has to do to make it. I like those conversations more than I do the season's over. Let's complain for 2 weeks while we watch the Army Navy game, and then do that. I that's not football to me. I don't like the pageantry. I think it's just ridiculous.
So
I much more rather have
It's also
the
way
algorithm that each
harder.
team knows what they have to do.
I was about to make the same exact point that Thomas was about to make. It's harder to do that in college because you have so many different schools and so many different conferences, and to sit here and go every conference is the same. Oh, a 2-loss Pac-12 school is the same as a 2-loss Big Ten school is not the same thing.
An undefeated SEC school is different from an undefeated Pac-12 school.
No, absolutely.
100%. But I will say, look, is there a perfect algorithm you can come up with to eliminate this? No, and that's why we're still going to have this of the 12-team playoff. I've said that all.
So it's going to be
I just think you get less of the. I just think you get less of the weight in regards to all this debating and whatnot in regards for the first four, because at least you could say they haven't said what they're going to do in regards to how they'll sort the guys out, but I would imagine they could have a clause in there that says, look, if you just win your conference, if you make it to the conference championship, you win your conference, and we don't know where you'll end up, but you'll be there. That just gives some kind of stability.
That's the part of the 12-team playoff, and it's why it should have been implemented. The simple solution to this entire question of conference strength of schedule is, okay, we're going to make it 12 teams. If you're not in those 12, there's probably a good chance we know if you're in those 12, there's probably a good chance you deserve to be there, right? We know the teams that can compete for a national championship fall within that 12, right? And of course, we give those five. I kind of disagree with this. We give the five Power 5 schools automatic bids, and then we give a group of 5 school an automatic bid. I totally disagree with that. Now that I think about it, I just.
It doesn't mean you have to give them a bye and put them in the top 5.
You can also cap it out from. So a point to your algorithm thing, it's going to be really hard because there's so many conferences and so many teams. But to the whole, I know they'll never do this ever, especially from a financial aspect. But they could cap out teams from their, because you have your divisions within your conference, right?
Not anymore.
Sure, but just off the old idea, you could cap out Power 5 schools, like, so you don't run into the issue of like, oh, this is just going to turn into an SEC playoff. You could cap it out. Let's say for the 12-team playoff, you have 4 out of the SEC, 2 out of the ACC. Like, just like
you cannot do that. There's too much money at play. If you're going to sit there and go, we're paying millions and millions of dollars just to have. Yeah. Okay.
That's what. No. That's what I said. No. I was saying, like, if they could have thought of something where finance, obviously it will never happen because of the finance aspect. That's why I opened up saying, I know it won't happen because of how much money you're going to lose. You could cap out teams from each conference so you don't have to run into an issue of, oh, this playoff is dominated by the SEC or like stuff like that. Obviously it will never happen. Again, I don't think it should, but just the idea to throw it out there is like, if you have a certain amount of teams that are like great, they can figure it out that way, and the best teams from the conference can get in and cap it out.
I'm kind of changing the subject in a way. So let's look at it from the other way. What if Florida State had gotten into that 4 slot and Alabama was at 5, right?
Oh,
Do you think
Florida State would get killed?
No, what I'm saying though is if you're on the committees, would the committee be penalizing Alabama for playing an out of conference school at that point?
No, I think I don't know. It's hard to say because you have to think about it also from the viewership perspective. Yes, if Florida State had a great case to get in, but you run into that aspect of, well, the conference strength. Alabama won the SEC, and yes, Florida State won the ACC, but Bama, as much as it hurts, especially from what happened this year, Alabama deserves to be in there way more than Florida State because
Well,
one, they're going to put up.
no, I think we all agree with you. What I'm saying though is let's say Florida State got in and Alabama was left out because of their loss to Texas.
Sure,
right? Would that entice power conferences to go out and play other conferences? Because here's the thing: if Alabama had scheduled, let's say Alabama was left out, and they had scheduled, I don't know, for a out of conference Power 5 school, what if they had gone out and scheduled Oregon State? Right? That's rather than Texas, make them schedule Oregon State. If they probably would have won that game, right?
And they've already said number 1 right now.
Then you're looking at an undefeated Alabama school, right?
Sure.
What I'm saying is if you had left Alabama out of the playoff, you would have essentially been penalizing them for playing hard out of conference opponents. And then by you losing that game, you're now penalized for it.
Sure, but here's the thing. You also, again, your argument in this is like, oh, well, the team who they would have played, if they won, they would have been undefeated. But they played, yes, a tough Texas team who's in the playoff right now. So, one, that gave, I think also you run into the thing, if Bama got left out, you have more of a case to put, this would be even worse because you have more of a case that put Bama in, and I know they're in. I'm not disagreeing with any of that. They have more of a case to be in than Florida State does because their one loss was to another team in the college football playoff.
But Florida, and this kind of go, but I come back and I say, well, Florida State's undefeated. You know,
Sure.
That's
wait,
that's
again, but then you look at, but then you look at, then you also look at who they lost to. It's like, oh, if they lost to some team outside of the playoff, okay, that makes, even if they won the SEC championship, that makes sense. Because a big part of the argument was Texas was in the playoff. And you weren't going to, Texas, again.
And they had a worse loss than Alabama. They lost to Oklahoma.
Yeah, no,
sure,
that's the craziest thing about this entire, one of the crazy things. So
it was either Texas, Bama and Texas or none. Because you can't have Bama without Texas.
That was the thing that was funny about Texas too, is the fact that their one argument that they had was we beat Alabama.
And they
had the best win on the board.
They won the conference. Wait, did they win their conference championship?
They did. But they did it against the Oklahoma State team that's number 20. So, like.
Yeah, but you still have the title of Big 12 champions.
Look, the idea is this, right? Let's just erase that whole deal that happened with Oklahoma. Right? Let's erase that. Like it never happened. Texas won that game. Right? What's the difference between Texas and Florida State at that point? You're looking at 2 undefeated champions. You have one from the ACC, one from the Big 12. Both conferences are kind of on par, in my opinion. Would y'all agree?
I would agree.
For Big 12 and
Big
ACC?
12 and ACC?
I think Big 12 is a little bit better. I think they're in between.
That's
I think they're in between SEC and ACC.
But would you say that they're relatively close?
Yeah.
Yeah. Decent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So essentially, what you're looking at is the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. The only difference would be from Texas's perspective is the out of the SEC school that you beat was Alabama, right?
Yep.
For Florida State, the argument is LSU.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But Alabama's a better team than LSU.
That's what I'm saying.
Sure. You're looking at
it's you're getting into a
Yeah,
spiral again.
So this is what the college football playoff committee dealt with these last 35 minutes. So like on one side, I understand why no matter what you slice it, someone's going to get butthurt about it. And the more we get into this spiral debate about what happened this year, it just proves the need to get to a 12-team playoff. But I think it also
100%.
shows even going to 12 teams, then that just takes this argument and puts a little bit less weight on it, but it's still going to be there in regards to who should get in and who should not.
Well, it's always
But-
gonna. It's
but-
never not gonna be there.
It's never not going to be there, but at least there will be some teams in there that we can be like, there'll be more teams rather. Like in this case,
So,
we can't
Like you
we
said,
can't argue
it won't have as much weight because you won't have to run into the best teams in the country. Well, yes, you still will, but like it's a difference between 5 and 6 comparative to 13 and 14, which is a huge difference.
So I have a question. I have a quick question for y'all. So looking forward, we're going to be in a 12-team playoff system, right? 12 teams. The 5 Power 5s, well, I guess 4 Power 4 schools now, since the Pac-12 is no longer with us. You're going to see, I believe part of the ruling is going to be seeing some of those conferences. If you're a conference champion, you get an automatic bid.
it should be like that.
Which should
You
that
say it
makes
should
sense.
be, but here's my question though, right? So let's look at some of the there's a clear difference in the top 2 conferences versus the bottom 2 conferences in that argument. So a couple days ago we saw the 2024 SEC schedules come out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys were looking at them.
Oh
Oh
right.
my gosh. That is a bear of a schedule for any school in there.
Believe it or not, it's actually our easiest record. Easiest strength of schedule we've had in over 6 years.
Well, that's y'all's fault because you go off and schedule schools like Clemson for your out-of-conference schedule.
This time
And that reason is why I'll
This
never
time
hear
it's
the
Notre
argument
Dame.
that Kevin Sumlin was better than Jimbo Fisher. That right there. I don't want to go into that debate, but any
or
of those
Miami.
guys saying that, it's that reason right there. But before we spiral too much, we're running out of time here. We gotta preview the top 4 matchups.
That's fair
For the playoffs. So
that's fair.
Let's do around the room on this. Let's start with the number 1 and number 4 matchup, Michigan versus Alabama. Guys, we saw the weird reaction from the Michigan players when they found out they were playing Bama. It was almost like the air was kind of sucked out of the room. So
I mean, duh.
Michigan is a really, I don't know. They kind of have the villain story with them, with everything that happened with Harbaugh's coaching staff and this Connor Stallion guy, whatever. But I personally, allegedly, don't sue us. Pat McAfee show reference there. But in regards to Michigan, personally, I just like watching their style of football. Honestly, with the way their defense is run, they have a talented defensive line. They've got a really good run game and a pretty good quarterback in J.J. McCarthy. And then you got Bama there with all of a sudden an offense that could barely hang up 17 against USF, or what? Maybe it was 21 they put up against them. It wasn't much. Like they didn't even score a touchdown in the first half against them, I believe. All of a sudden, turn into one of the most dynamic offenses ever that we've seen in the last half of the season. I don't know who to call this one. I can tell you who I want to win. I just want to see Michigan win just to see the world go in flames and to just see something different in the final championship game. But in regards to who's going to actually win this matchup, I'll start with Thomas. Who do you think? I'll start with Thomas, go to Bert. Who do you think is going to win and why?
I personally think Bama would win because we go back to the conference strengths. They're an SEC team who became insanely hot towards the end of the season. Then you have who beat
almost lost to Auburn though. Should have lost to Auburn.
Sure, but they also beat the number 1 team in the country and kicked them out of the playoff just like that.
That has the 33rd highest strength of schedule,
but also hasn't lost a game in 3 years.
Exactly.
I know, but obviously they were a different team this year with a
but
basically freshman quarterback and
on paper,
easy schedule.
But still, you look at it, number 1 team in the country, they beat them and whatnot. I think they beat Michigan because of how hot they are right now. And I just think the talent in the SEC is way different from the talent in the Big Ten.
Bert, before you answer real quick, the part 2 to the question I want you to answer is, one, who do you think is going to win and why? But number 2, do you think this game comes down to Alabama shutting down the run game of Michigan?
So I'm going to agree with what Thomas just said and say that generally speaking, the SEC has some of the best, will have the better talent team in these situations. I only have one exception to that, and that exception is Michigan. I think Michigan is the one school that I can compete talent to talent with Alabama. That being said, I tend to agree with Thomas. I like Alabama in this game. I think you've seen Jalen Milroe really develop from week 2 in Texas and USF, and you've really started to see him find himself a little bit and establish himself as a solid player. And a lot of credit, I think, has to go to Nick Saban and the coaching staff. This is one of those seasons where you just look. I tend to look at Nick Saban and I say, there's a reason why he's considered the GOAT for college football coaches, and this isn't a testament to that. He's finding himself struggling at the beginning of the season, and he's able to go and kind of coach up some of his star player into finding his role in the team and really becoming something special, right? Now, in terms of your second question,
so does Michigan's rushing game and Alabama's ability to stop the run, is that the pivot point for this game?
No. I think it's what really is going to come down to, because here's why I say that, right? So when I think of an Alabama as a school, the one thing that I can really always hang my hat on is a very solid front 8 defensively, right? That's always been a staple of Alabama. And I think really, if you are an Alabama front 8 defender, you can compete with anybody in the school, in the country, excuse me. Michigan, very well known for their offensive linemen, a solid running game. I tend to think that those two factors kind of trump each other in the game. So what I really think it's going to come down to is quarterback play. Who has a better game, Jalen Milroe or J.J. McCarthy? How does McCarthy adjust to an Alabama secondary that has some pretty decent talent associated with it? How well does Jalen Milroe adjust to a pretty solid defense in Michigan as well?
That can get pressure with 4.
Exactly. I think it really comes down to which quarterback can adjust and play better in that game. That's kind of my key to the game.
So I think in general, I think that's pretty spot on. My only add on to that is I just think I think JJ McCarthy is a really good quarterback, right? I do think Alabama has better receivers than Michigan at this time. And we've seen that all year, that Michigan has very much been a run first team, not like Army triple option 1940s, but run first, right? They run closer to a pro set style of football. And they seem to be a team that they use the run to open up the pass via play action, or just they'll have less routes. They'll block with 7 if they need to. Or you don't see them running a lot of spread. Is my main point.
Mm-hmm.
Alabama is so dynamic in the fact that they can run whatever is needed. They made adjustments in that Auburn game to become relevant again and make pushes. They made adjustments against A&M when they were down at half to come back and win that game. I think their offense is more flexible in Alabama. I think Michigan, in order for them to be competitive offensively, if their defense is shutting out Alabama, then then it's a cancel out. But if both teams, if Alabama's offense is moving, then Michigan has got to be able to run the football in order for their offense to be able to to match that level of production. Exactly.
Also,
that's my point. That's why I think it's the pivot point.
You also, here's the thing with Bama is their team right now is firing on all cylinders. If they put up points, they're going to put them up quick because it's not just on offense too. It's on their defensive side as well. Because if you start saying them, I feel like JJ is going to get a little over. I know he plays in big games, but I feel like Bama, this is like their thing. And especially because they play big games at a higher level. Again, we go back to that argument,
SEC
SEC
championship.
versus Big Ten. Like, you're going to get hit with so much crap if you have a blitz by freaking 300-pound, 6'5", 300-pound D linemen who run a 4.5, 4.6. You're gonna get phased, and then you're gonna make the poor pass and get picked off. And with Bama, it's more likely to get sixth than it not, because these cornerbacks run like 4.3s, 4.4s, and are elusive. Like,
I would just say of the quarterbacks that are there, the one that's more susceptible to getting razzled, I think, is still Milroe. I think McCarthy has seen a lot of these similar situations before. He's also been in the playoff before and dealt with this. Now, granted, he lost by a slim margin to TCU, but he's been here, and he's also faced this kind of pressure before. And I think also with that offense, if the run is there, if he needs to air out, he can. But if the run is there, then he's not going to miss a throw. Or an important one, rather. So I think Milroe is more susceptible to having an up and down game.
But then you also look at what Milroe had to deal with all season, almost losing, having to come back with A&M, having to come back. Well, yes, they lost to Texas, but they didn't lose by a lot. You had him come back and throw the game-winning drive, the game-winning pass of the SEC championship whenever it was like fourth and 55. Like, he looks dang good in crunch time.
So I think
they did lose by 10 to Texas, though. But
I think we need to move on. But I'll kind of put a period on this game by saying I have this game being very close. I think these teams match up very well against each other. I honestly think that this might be the best game of the playoff, including the national championship game. This is going to be a fun game.
So with Texas and Washington number 2, Texas number 3, Washington being an undefeated team, Texas having that one loss to Oklahoma earlier in the season. Both sides have a pretty dynamic offense. I'd say I do give the edge in defense currently to Texas. Still horns down, though. I give a slight edge in defense to Texas currently by a very slim margin. I think both of these guys don't have a defense that stacks up with Michigan and Bama. So in order for any of these two teams to win, they're going to have to put up a lot of points and match whatever level of production that whatever team is in that actual college football playoff final. So they'll have to match it with offensive production.
The one I totally agree with everything you said when it comes to the dynamicness of the offenses. I mean, Michael Penix Jr. and Quinn Ewers, enough said, right? The one separation that I can see between these two teams is, frankly, when it comes to big boys up front. I'd give a slight nod to Texas. When Texas announced that they were joining the SEC several years ago, I think there was a big push to beef up some of the physical positions. And Texas knew that coming in, knew that they were going to have to do that. And so I think you're starting to see them blossom a little early, right? I think you're starting to see, the benefits of having some of those physical players up front. So I tend to think that when this game comes down to the nitty gritty, maybe in the fourth quarter, I think that physicality is what's going to provide some separation between those two schools. Other than that, I think Texas defensively has a nod to Washington as well. I honestly could see how this game's pretty close going into the third quarter, and then Texas kind of finding some separation.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see Washington. I can see the same thing flipped around, but Washington be the one that comes out on top in that exact same scenario. I think this is another really exciting matchup that, I honestly think this will be the best and closest, especially initial round, like the semifinals. I think it'll be the best semifinal matchup we've ever seen.
There's the one X factor I think Washington has is going to just be Michael Penix Jr. You have made yourself a name this year. Now prove it, right?
Yeah.
You're going up against the best of the best. Prove it. And honestly, I kind of see this might be a little like CJ Stroud kind of moment for him. You've kind of, people know who you are, but you haven't really faced that top tier defense quite yet. How high in the draft do you want to go?
Yeah, I agree. Thomas, what's your thoughts?
I think so. My heart wants Washington to win. My brain is 50-50 because so I feel like you run into that same thing with Bama and Michigan. They're like on both sides they match up well. I feel like they match up well, Texas and Washington together, and I feel like the key for Washington to win is their defense isn't the best. So they're going to have to throw up points, a lot of them. And luckily, their offense loves to throw up a lot of points. So I think if their offense struggles, they're screwed. But I feel like they show up, especially against Oregon, because Oregon was on another level this year. I feel like if they can compete against Oregon and throw up that many points, I feel like they have a great shot at beating Texas, but they have to play almost like a perfect game. As perfect as you can play, like no turnovers. You're gonna have to put up a lot of points.
They'll have to win in time of possession as well.
Yes.
You can't give Texas extra chances.
Exactly. But I feel like if you have that one or two mistakes, I feel like for Washington it might snowball, and Texas will jump on that, overwhelm them, and maybe flip the game. But I also think this is going to be a high scoring, very tight last possession, maybe game-winning field goal type of game.
So long story short, Thomas is saying Texas is a better team. That's what I'm hearing.
I have Washington winning.
Off the show.
I have Washington. I have Washington winning. I will say I have Washington winning, but I feel like if Washington doesn't play a perfect game, which I feel like they're capable of doing, then I can see Texas beating them. But I still think I still think, and this is a little bias, I still think Washington pulls it off though. And Penix, this is where Penix, like you said, Bert, this is where his CJ Stroud moment comes into where he really
froze there.
I feel like he gets it done.
Say that one more time. You froze there.
I said, unlike CJ, I think he gets it done in the semifinal.
Hey, to be fair, CJ did get it done. His kicker didn't.
Yeah,
keep that in mind.
And luckily,
he did freaking get it done.
We have him in Houston actually.
Hey, that's another episode.
That's another episode.
Another episode.
I had to throw it in there because he gives us hope as Houston Texans fans.
Yes, he and D'Amico have been our main sources of hope, and that'll be exciting to see. We'll probably be back next week talking about that, or in 2 weeks, and I'm excited to see that. Pretty much all these matchups we just talked about on New Year's Eve or New Year's, whichever. Was it New Year's Day they're playing or New Year's Eve?
It's New Year's
Eve. Okay.
Last year was New Year's Eve.
That's gonna. I've never been more excited to see a playoff before because there's no obvious team that's just going to go lay an egg like a Notre Dame.
There's no way this isn't going to be the most viewed playoff
for sure
of all time.
For sure. Well, guys, very excited to watch this playoff and very excited to break down the first round of this when we come back and talk about college football playoff again. Thank you guys for hopping on, and we'll see you guys next time.
Merry Christmas to everyone.
Merry Christmas. Hopefully I get this off before Christmas.
If not,
peace,
happy
guys.
late Christmas.
Happy New Year.
Yes. Peace, guys.